Hey there guys and gals, Anime Dude here, and in order to celebrate 10,000 subscribers here in this channel, I'm gonna hit y'all up with 3 of my personal top 10s. Why am I doing 3, you may ask? Cause 3 is not only my favorite number, but it's also the magic number, and well, trying to manage any more than that on top of what I already have planned would probably kill me. Anyways, I know top 10s aren't something I normally do, but I figured no mixture of words could ever thank you all enough, so why not throw out 3 videos in 3 days in an attempt to show you all how much I appreciate your support. Today, I'm going to be going over my personal top 10 sporting events in anime, be they games, matches, bouts, or whatever. Heads up that this will obviously have some varying degrees of spoilers revolving around the events in question, as well as the shows they're from. To make it extra fun, I won't be including more than one event from each series, so odds are, there's something from your favorite sports anime, whatever that may be. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. At number 10, we have the Vorpal Swords versus the Jabberwocks in Kuroko No Basket. Okay, so I've been on the record as having a bit of a love-hate relationship with this series. Basketball is my favorite sport, but this is far from my favorite sports anime. As an anime fan, I really did enjoy it, but as someone who's grown up around basketball, I just have to try to not take it too seriously. I've said many a times that realism doesn't equal good, and being unrealistic doesn't make something bad, but rather it's all about consistency. And ooh buddy, this show is consistently unrealistic and over the top. That doesn't mean it's necessarily bad by any means, in fact I'd say it's objectively good, so any hate I may throw its way is just a bit of personal bias. With that being said, don't get too mad at me, okay Kuroko fans? It did make the list after all. In Kuroko No Basket, each member of the Generation of Miracles brings cool, new, over-the-top superpowers to the table. Seeing as how entertaining that can be, it was actually hard to pick one game from this show, but I finally decided to go with the game that showed off all kinds of cool over-the-top things at once in the form of a movie. That's right, Kuroko, Kagami, and the entire Generation of Miracles teamed up to play an antagonist team that kinda sucked. I mean, they were terribly written, but they got buckets and that's what matters, right? Life is all about getting buckets. Regular old basketball buckets, Apex buckets, YouTube buckets, you name it, it's all about the buckets. Buckets make the world go round, and they got buckets. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, alright. So the opposing team was terribly written, but watching these superpowered teenagers play basketball was simply too entertaining for me to exclude from this list. At the end of the day, life is about buckets, and woo buddy do these boys get buckets. Okay, so I guess this one could partially be nostalgia bias, but I used to really love this show called Hungry Heart Wild Striker. The way the main character played with such reckless abandon and the great musical track that went alongside it, I don't know, it just always got me hyped, you know? When I first started watching this show, I also played soccer, so I guess you could say I got extra invested. I don't know, do any of you guys ever play real sports with a sports anime OST playing in the back of your head? I did, and may I say, worked like a charm. Got myself some soccer buckets. Anyways, I haven't seen this show in a fat minute, but there's one game in particular that's ingrained in my memory. I'm not gonna spoil the circumstances surrounding the match, but it was the final game of the 52 episode series. It was pouring down rain, everyone was exhausted as it went down to the wire, and as cheesy and over the top as this show can be sometimes, it really embodies the concept of overwhelming tenacity and perseverance. It ain't over till it's over, and if it's not over, you best be playing your heart out. You have to have a hunger for victory and go for it like you're going for that barbecued chicken. This show always gets me hyped, but that last game in particular is forever ingrained in my memory, and I couldn't resist throwing it in towards the bottom of this list. At number 8, we have Seto High versus Inashiro Industrial in the finals of the 89th National High School Baseball Championship qualifiers. Okay, so I'm gonna be honest here. I haven't watched the second season of Diamond No Ace, so obviously this isn't a show I've finished. There could be better games in this show alone, but I can only really take into consideration the games I've seen, and this was a pretty great one. I just had to slide it in here somewhere. The first 50 episodes of the first season help us to grow attached to the Seto High team, including their seniors. Heck, it may not be an exaggeration to say especially their seniors. This was an anime where we see that the seniors weren't the best coming into high school, but their hard work made them into a powerhouse, and honestly, the freshmen and second years trying their best just to earn a rotation spot on such a talented team was amazing. The coach was competent, and the myriad of talent striving to contribute to the team in whatever way they could made this anime feel like one of the more realistic sports anime out there, if not the most realistic in that regard. Them making it to the final round of the preliminaries was a long and difficult journey, and it truly felt like they were going to go to the Koshien together. They battled it out for 13 episodes against another really talented team in order to accomplish that goal they'd set out for. Multiple characters made an impact throughout, as the scoreboard flipped a couple separate times. However, while I don't want to go into too much detail about the entire match, what really makes it memorable was how it concluded. The senior ace pitcher is forced to go back to the bench, and he passes on the ace torch to our freshman protagonist. In a pinch, bottom of the 7th with 2 outs and a 3-1 count, our protagonist manages to shut out the inning and keeps the other team scoreless in the 8th inning as well. They go into the bottom of the 9th with a 1-point lead, and Sawamura realizes that this game has reached a moment where it's win or lose. This one inning is a life or death situation, if you will, and he carries everyone's hopes on his shoulders. Despite such intense pressure, he manages to get the first 2 outs, and they're one more away from their goal. Then, he throws a dead ball, letting a man on first, and then proceeds to finally break under the pressure. They sub him out, and after the next pitcher comes in, they go on to lose this game that had everything on the line. The final moments of this match were based off the 2006 West Tokyo High School Baseball Final, which is probably an irrelevant bit of trivia for the most part, but I don't know, I thought it was cool and worth the mention. Anyways, that match concluded in a truly tragic way that sets up future development for the younger players, especially our protagonist Sawamura, and it truly shocked me that this was where our third years that we'd grown to love were forced to retire. So, the shortest entry on this list may not have been the most important game in Hikaru no Go, not by a long shot, but it was a very impactful game that finally made it clear just how much Hikaru had grown up to that point. I still remember thinking it was the coolest game ever as a kid, and it holds up. Hikaru was out and about in Hokkaido for reasons I won't spoil, and then while he was there, he ended up playing a man named Shuhei, who was one of the best non-pro Go players in Japan. Or at the very least, he was the one that was going to represent them at the upcoming International Amateur Tournament. Hikaru starts the game rather unmotivated and depressed, but midway through, he hears some info about a place he needs to be at, and likewise, he becomes motivated to end the game as quickly as possible. Once that happened, he started playing immediately after each of his opponent's moves, and it almost appeared as if he was playing purely on instinct. Normally, it'd be impossible to do something like that without making mistakes. But Hikaru wasn't just playing by instinct. He used the time his opponent spent thinking to take into consideration each direction the game could possibly go in. Likewise, he already knew what moves he would make depending on where his opponent played. Seeing him effortlessly destroy such a skilled player through this kind of speed go was not only unexpected, but it honestly just blew me away. Like I said, this not only made it clear just how much he'd grown in such a short span of time, but he got some style points for making something so amazing look so effortless. It may not have had the highest stakes or have been the most important, but I thought this was cool and this is my list, so suck it. Hikaru got board game buckets, and that's that. So, at number 6, we have the Hunter x Hunter dodgeball game with the Greed Island players versus Razor. Okay, so this one may be cheating since I know it isn't a sports anime by any definition of the word. And it's likely the equivalent of me including the baseball game in Dragon Ball Super or the UA Sports Festival or whatever. But this is the only non-sports anime match I threw in on this list, so whatever, here goes nothing. This dodgeball match was freaking phenomenal, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but seeing a shonen anime, especially one that's as well thought out as Hunter x Hunter, play around with the concept of a life or death scenario in the confines of a single dodgeball game was way cooler than I ever thought it would be. The trust that Gon and Killua had built between each other up to that point was put on full display, and nice guy Hisoka being a full-fledged teammate only added to the fun. Anyways, the Greed Island arc is one of my least favorite Hunter x Hunter arcs, but I'd still give it a 10 out of 10. Togashi, you are something else. At number 5, we have one of the games that hit me the most on a personal level. In this spot, we have Shohoku vs Kanan from Slam Dunk in the District Finals round robin. Not only is Slam Dunk one of my favorite sports series, but basketball is by far my favorite sport, and I grew up playing it. This series was full of great games, but there's one in particular that I remember better than the rest. So as for why this game is so memorable, I have a bit of a personal story that relates to it, so grab some popcorn as I take you on a trip through memory lane. Then, we'll tie it back into the Slam Dunk game at the very end, okay? Okay, so in my 4 years of high school basketball, we fought our way through the playoffs and went to this thing called the state tournament a total of 3 times. Up until the state tournament, the playoffs were double eliminations, so one loss wasn't the end, and likewise, in Slam Dunk, their path to the Nationals was in a round-robin format. In other words, the setups were similar, to while one loss hurt a lot, it wasn't necessarily the end of the world. My sophomore year of high school, we were on the precipice of attending the state tournament for the first time in our school's history, and we had a really close game against a talented team. It was the area finals, so the winner would advance to the state tournament, and the loser would have one more game against the winner of the loser's bracket to determine the other team to represent our area. In other words, it was a really big game that was shockingly similar to the one they had to play in Slam Dunk. I was still coming off the bench my sophomore year, so I wasn't on the court at the time, but I witnessed one of my best friends that was my age play a phenomenal game leading up to the final moments. We were up by 1 with time winding down, and then he grabbed one of the best rebounds I've ever seen over 2 6'8" guys, one that was on our team and one on the other team. Not only that, but then he managed to go back up with it over both of them and finish one of the most impressive putbacks I've ever seen. While that may sound like a heroic tale of how we went to our first state tournament, he actually scored on the wrong goal, and that tiny mental mistake in the moment essentially gave the game away. No one on our team blamed him for it, and in fact we just tried to reassure him that it wasn't a big deal since we could still win the area consolation game the next night, but I can only imagine how he felt after that. He's a mentally tough guy that I respect a lot because he managed to bounce back and help us secure a ticket to the big house the following night, but in that moment, that one surreal moment, when that initial celebration was replaced by a defeated look of guilt on his face as the final buzzer sounded, the heavy silence and disbelief throughout the entire arena, no one sure of how to react at what had just happened. I may have been right there on the sidelines when it happened, but that experience was something I'll never forget. It just didn't feel real. Relating that back, watching Shohoku play their heart out against the defending champs in their district was amazing. But what set this game in particular apart for me was how it ended. Sakuragi is always doing dumb things, but by this point, he's fallen in love with basketball, become a pivotal member of the team's starting 5, and played his heart out in order to compete against some of the best players in the country. In the 4th quarter of this game, he hit some big free throws Granny style or Rick Barry style or whatever you want to call it. Then, he had an amazing and one dunk to bring them within 2, and after a potential game-winning 3-pointer was tipped, he continued to battle his heart out on the boards. When he did so, he got an amazing rebound over 2 opposing players. Truly, they were in that game largely due to the tenacity and heart he showed, which made what happened next all too painful. Getting double teamed after that board, time was winding down and he attempted to dump the ball down to their team captain. However, when he did so, he accidentally passed the ball to a member of the other team. This may not be anyone else's favorite game in this series, or maybe it is, I don't know. But that heavy silence in the arena afterwards as everyone watched on, the tears full of guilt and regret flowing down his face, and Akagi taking it all in before comforting him, it all felt so real, it was all so tragic, and at this point, you felt as if you were one of their teammates on the bench, just trying to imagine what he must be feeling. Maybe it's only because what happened to Sakuragi and what happened to my friend were so shockingly similar, and thus I witnessed a similar experience firsthand, but that was truly a game that I'll never forget. At number 4, we have the Hokone Ekiden from Run with the Wind. Now, this is one of the better shows to come out in recent years, and it's one that I don't hear talked about nearly enough. I kinda get why too. Had I been told that a show about cross country could ever be this entertaining, I'd be skeptical to say the least. Cross country is a sport I kinda made fun of growing up because from a spectator viewpoint, there's not much to see. They're just running and running. And oh, would you look at that? They're still running. And then I ran cross country myself for a bit, and I freaking hated it. I got an 18th place medal in a small meet that had like 40 people. Long distance sucked. I just couldn't wrap my head around how people could be interested in this sport. However, I guess you could say I was swayed, because while it doesn't sound entertaining from a spectator point of view, and I didn't enjoy it in my own personal experience, this series showed me some perspective and made me look at things way differently. We see cross country from the viewpoint of the many great and unique characters found in this show's cast, many of whom don't start out with any interest in running cross country themselves. With that being said, this entire show led up to the finale that was this one major race, and I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but it was without a doubt one of the best sporting events that I've ever seen in anime. Here at number 3, we have Takamura vs. Hawk from Hajime no Ippo. Ippo is one of my favorite series of all time, so had I not limited myself to one bout from it, I'm sure there's many more that could have potentially made this list. However, when I think of all the great bouts in this show, there's one that reigns supreme above the rest, and that's Takamura's Junior Middleweight World Championship bout against the one and only Brian Hawk. Heck, had this been a list of the top 10 fights in anime, this still may have made the list. Takamura is one of the best characters in anime or manga, and throughout much of Ippo, we never get to see him truly tested. He's a bit of a bigger dude, standing at 6'1" and naturally weighing in at over 200 pounds, so we see his intense dedication to boxing through his insane workouts and weight control. I mean, he has to drop 46 pounds just to be able to fight in the junior middleweight class, but as far as competition goes, there's nobody near his weight class in Japan that's able to put up much of a fight, even after he dropped down so many weight classes. Because of that, he's built up throughout the show as a seemingly invincible champion that goofs off a lot. However, for this fight, he faced an American that was the undefeated world champ, and for the first time, it seemed as if he was outmatched. Not only that, but this wasn't the most sportsmanlike bout. Brian was a complete and total dick that went so far as to lay his hands on Coach Kamigawa, and as a result, we saw Takamura far more pissed off than ever before. He genuinely hated his guts. Seeing the fan favorite champ that is Takamura go unhinged against an extremely hateable opponent that pushes him to his very limit, my god, there's few things better than that. Basically, the circumstances building up to this bout were insanely compelling. It set the expectations high, and the fight that followed didn't let me down in the slightest. At number 2, we have Seishu vs. Kaido in Major Season 3. Out of all the matches on this list, this is not only among my all-time favorites, but it's one of the ones I want to spoil the least, so go watch Major. If you go do that, then I won't have to feel bad about all the spoilers I'm about to drop. Anyways, the second half of Season 2 and the entirety of Season 3 basically all build up to this one game. While it was arguably one of the more unrealistic games in the series, and I've seen plenty of hate given to it on the discussion boards, it was undoubtedly a game I'll never personally forget. Goro, our main character, had been injured, and since they didn't really have a backup pitcher on his team full of newbies, he repeatedly chose to ice his foot in order to play through it. A reckless decision to say the least, but Goro's always been a selfishly stubborn character with a one-track mind, so reckless is pretty par for the course for him. Because of that injury, the game was almost stopped several times, and it should have been if we're only using our heads. In addition to that, they were up against a team that included one of his best friends and the rest of his former teammates, a team with multiple future pros on it. With much less talent surrounding him, an injury that had been festering for a while, and the game being a rather long one, to say the odds were against him is a major understatement. However, Goro is a global level talent, and this game in particular showed us just how much of a monster he really was. He showed incredible willpower as he persevered in order to compete against one of the top teams in Japan, and to be blatantly honest, he was just playing on another level. He imposed his will onto the game, taking it further than it ever should have realistically gone. I don't remember the exact numbers, but he carried his team into extra innings and threw over 184 pitches until he inevitably collapsed on the mound. Needless to say, despite his insane talent, there were those that questioned if this would end his baseball career before it ever had a chance to start, as he undoubtedly put his entire future on the line for this one game. The sheer tenacity he displayed as he continued to push on well past his limits gave me chills, and needless to say, this will forever be one of the most memorable games I've ever experienced in a sports anime. Go watch Major if you haven't already. And at number 1, we have Karasuno vs Shiratorizawa from Haikyuu Season 3. Alrighty, so had you told me a few years back that I'd fall in love with the volleyball anime to the point where one of the games in it topped a list like this, I doubt I would have ever believed it. However, after watching the first 3 seasons and then catching up to the manga, I can say that this series has plenty of other amazing games as well, and it wouldn't have been surprising for any number of them to make a list like this. But for me personally, there was one game in particular that stood out above the rest, and it had the entirety of the 3rd season dedicated to it. Karasuno had fought hard against many other great teams to get to this point, and frankly, this game had everything on the line. If they won, then they made it back to nationals, and if they lost, then their season was over and the 3rd years would retire. What made this game so great was the thematic importance it held. Shiratorizawa was the favorite in their area, as they'd won and made it to the nationals the previous 2 years. With that being said, Shiratorizawa wasn't necessarily the best team they'd played, but they were the most talented on an individual level. In other words, they weren't necessarily greater than the sum of their parts, but the sum of those parts had always been plenty all its own. Ushijima was the most overwhelming presence Karasuno had ever faced. This was the first and only 5-set match of the series, but in it we saw multiple Karasuno players do whatever they could to help give their team a chance. They strategized a lot, fought tooth and nail with each member playing a role, and honestly, I got chills at multiple points throughout the game. I couldn't believe that the entirety of a high-quality anime season was dedicated to one match, but the entirety of that match kept me on the edge of my seat, and I honestly don't want to spoil anything more about it. I want you all to experience it for yourselves because quite frankly, it's the best match I've ever seen in a sports anime. With that concluding my top 10 sporting events in anime, I want to encourage you to let me know your favorites down below. Huge thank you to Kara Alter, Murdoch, Love Phenomenon, Langer, Soulslayer, Gamer, Gentleman, Genkotaku, Jessica LaFawn, Red Emperor, Wolflord, Shelly, Technorec, Rubo, and everyone else over on Patreon for helping to make videos like this possible. If you want your name at the end of videos like this alongside this amazing group of people right here, then I'll leave a link to that down in the description. Don't forget to check in tomorrow at 10 AM for another top 10 list. Thank you all for watching, and Anime Dude out.